The cleaner arrived to work in a luxurious mansion. Upon entering to clean the millionaire's room, she froze when she saw her childhood photo in a black frame. The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of Scarlett's modest bedroom, bathing the room in a soft, golden hue. She exhaled deeply, clutching her grandmother Mildred's frail hand as she reassured her, "Don't worry, Nana. I'll do my best today. This job could really change things for us." Her grandmother's smile was tired but encouraging. "Just be yourself, Scarlett. You've always been a hard worker. They'll see that." With a kiss on her grandmother's forehead, Scarlett grabbed her simple bag and headed out. The crisp air of the countryside greeted her as she boarded the early bus to the outskirts of New York City, where the imposing Matthews estate awaited her. She had heard whispers about the mansion, how its grandeur was only matched by the cold demeanor of its owner, Logan Matthews, a man shrouded in mystery and power. Scarlett's heart raced as she stepped through the wrought iron gates. The mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling estate with towering columns, immaculate gardens, and an air of calculated perfection. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, greeted her with a sharp nod, handing her a neatly folded uniform. "Stick to your assigned areas," Mrs. Henderson instructed briskly. "And whatever you do, don't touch anything personal in Mr. Matthews' quarters." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am," Scarlett replied, adjusting her apron and clutching the cleaning supplies like a lifeline. As the morning passed, Scarlett familiarized herself with the daunting schedule. The grandeur of the mansion overwhelmed her. Chandeliers glittering like stars, marble floors that echoed her every step, and portraits of the Matthews family adorning the walls, their stern gazes almost following her movements. But nothing prepared her for the moment she entered Logan Matthews' bedroom. The room was a blend of masculine elegance and meticulous order. A king-sized bed with perfectly pressed sheets stood at the center, flanked by dark mahogany furniture. The faint scent of leather and cedar lingered in the air as Scarlett dusted the shelves. Her gaze drifted to a wall adorned with various framed photographs. And then she froze. One picture caught her attention immediately, a photo of a little girl, no older than 5, clutching a worn teddy bear. The child's bright eyes and shy smile sent a jolt through Scarlett's chest. It was her. She recognized the house in the background, faint and blurry but unmistakable. She had lived there during the earliest years of her life, though her memories of that time were fragmented and hazy. Her hands trembled as she set down the duster. How is this here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her shoulders. Scarlett stepped closer, her fingers lightly grazing the frame as she studied the photo. Questions swirled in her mind, each more urgent than the last. Who had placed the picture here? Did Logan Matthews know about her connection to it? The sudden creak of the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Scarlett spun around, heart hammering in her chest. But it was only Mrs. Henderson. "What are you doing?" the housekeeper barked, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. I was just dusting," Scarlett stammered, quickly picking up the duster. Mrs. Henderson's gaze lingered on her for a moment before she nodded curtly. "Good. Stay focused. You're not here to daydream." As Mrs. Henderson left the room, Scarlett exhaled shakily, her mind still racing. The photo wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. She had to know the truth. By the time her shift ended, Scarlett was emotionally drained. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window, her reflection mingling with the blur of passing trees and distant city lights. When she arrived at their small home, her grandmother was waiting in her usual chair, knitting a patchwork blanket. "How was your first day?" Mildred asked, her voice soft with concern. Scarlett hesitated, clutching the strap of her bag. "It was fine," she replied, forcing a smile. But as she looked into her grandmother's knowing eyes, she felt the words bubbling up, threatening to spill over. "Nana," she finally said, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to ask you. Something about my past." Mildred's knitting needles paused mid-motion, and her expression shifted, a shadow of unease crossing her face. "What is it?" Scarlett took a deep breath. "When I was little, did we ever live near a big house, one with tall columns and a garden? Because today, I saw a photo of me as a child, in the home of someone I don't even know." Mildred's face paled, her hands gripping the yarn tightly for a long moment. She said nothing, The room filled with an uneasy silence. Then, with a trembling voice, she murmured, "I think we need to talk." Scarlett sat across from her grandmother, the small kitchen table suddenly feeling like the center of a storm. Mildred's hands trembled slightly as she set down her knitting and reached for a glass of water. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words, as Scarlett's curiosity burned brighter with each passing second. "What do you mean, we need to talk?" Scarlett pressed gently, her voice laced with both urgency and concern. Mildred avoided her granddaughter's gaze, her eyes fixed on the table as though the answers she sought might appear in the worn wood. "It's just, there are things about our past that I thought didn't matter anymore," she began hesitantly. "I never wanted to burden you with them." Scarlett leaned closer, her tone softening. "Nana, please. I need to understand. That photo. How could it end up in someone else's house? Who are these people?" Mildred sighed deeply, the lines on her face deepening as if the weight of her memories had resurfaced all at once. "Scarlett, some things are better left alone," she said finally, her voice carrying a hint of warning. "Please trust me on this." But Scarlett couldn't let it go. The image of the photo in Logan Matthews' home was seared into her mind. "I do trust you," she said, her tone unwavering, "but I also deserve to know the truth. If there's something about my childhood that connects me to that place, I need to find out." Mildred shook her head, her expression conflicted. "Not tonight," she said firmly, rising to her feet. "I'm tired." "Scarlett, let's talk about this another day." Scarlett wanted to protest, but the exhaustion in her grandmother's eyes stopped her. She nodded reluctantly, but the unanswered questions churned inside her like a restless tide. The next morning, Scarlett was back at the mansion, her steps heavier with the weight of unanswered questions. As she passed through the grand hall, the gleaming floors reflected her conflicted expression. Mrs. Henderson assigned her to the East Wing, but Scarlett's mind was still on Logan's bedroom, and the photo that had set her world spinning. She caught snippets of conversations between other staff members as they worked. Though Scarlett kept to herself, she couldn't help but overhear the whispered gossip about Logan Matthews. "Such a strange man," one maid muttered to another as they polished silverware. "Always keeps to himself. I don't think I've seen him smile once in all my years here." "Well, can you blame him?" the other replied. "After what happened to his mother. No wonder he's like that." Scarlett's ears perked up at the mention of his mother. She slowed her steps, pretending to inspect the nearest table while eavesdropping. "I've heard bits and pieces," the first maid continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "She vanished one day. Poof. Just like that, left behind her son and husband without a word. They say it nearly destroyed the family. More like destroyed Logan," the second maid added. "That's why he's so cold. No family. No one to care about." Scarlett's thoughts whirred. His mother had disappeared. Could that somehow be connected to the photo of her childhood? The timing seemed too coincidental. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something just beyond her grasp. As Scarlett continued her duties, she found herself drawn back to Logan's bedroom. The photo on the wall seemed to pull her like a magnet, its presence both unsettling and compelling. She hesitated in the doorway, glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was alone before stepping inside. This time, she inspected the surrounding area more closely. The shelf below the photo held a collection of neatly arranged items: books, trinkets, and a small leather-bound journal. Scarlett's fingers itched to open it, but Mrs. Henderson's warning about personal items echoed in her mind. Her resolve wavered. Maybe just a quick look wouldn't hurt, she reasoned. With a glance toward the door, she reached for the journal and flipped it open. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, and though the entries were brief, they offered glimpses into a world Scarlett barely understood. One entry caught her attention. "May 15th. She's gone. No one knows where. But I feel like it's my fault. Mother always said the family's reputation came first. Maybe that's why she left. Maybe we pushed her too far." Scarlett's heart pounded as she reread the words. Was Logan referring to his mother? Did her disappearance have something to do with family secrets? Secrets that might somehow involve her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Scarlett hastily returned the journal to its place and grabbed the duster she had set aside earlier. Mrs. Henderson entered the room, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of wrongdoing. "Everything all right here?" the housekeeper asked, her tone as curt as ever. "Yes, ma'am," Scarlett replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Just finishing up." Mrs. Henderson lingered for a moment before nodding. "Good. Move on to the dining room next." As the housekeeper left, Scarlett exhaled in relief, but the journal's words stayed with her, along with the gnawing sense that she was uncovering something much bigger than she had anticipated. That evening, back at home, Scarlett sat by the window, staring at the fading light. She replayed the maid's conversation and the words from Logan's journal in her mind. The puzzle pieces were there, but they refused to fit together. Her grandmother's reluctance only added to her frustration. "Nana," she murmured under her breath, glancing at the closed door to her grandmother's room. "You know something, and I'm going to find out what it is." Scarlett spent the next morning lost in thought, the weight of unanswered questions pressing heavily on her chest. As she carefully folded laundry at the mansion, her mind drifted back to the leather-bound journal in Logan's room. The cryptic entry about his mother lingered in her mind, intertwining with her grandmother's strange reaction the night before. When her shift ended, she hurried home, eager to confront Mildred once again. Scarlett found her grandmother sitting in her favorite chair, a crocheted blanket draped over her frail knees. The television played softly in the background, but Mildred's gaze was distant, as though her thoughts were somewhere far away. Scarlett knelt beside her, placing a hand on her grandmother's. "Nana," she began gently, "we need to talk. Please don't brush me off this time." Mildred hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around Scarlett's hand. "I told you, Scarlett," she murmured. "Some things are better left in the past. But I can't leave it there," Scarlett pressed, her voice firm but kind. "I found something at the mansion, a photo of me as a child. It's hanging in Logan Matthews' room, Nana. That's not a coincidence. You have to know something." Mildred's face paled, and she looked away, her expression clouded with a mix of guilt and sorrow. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the television. Finally, Mildred let out a shaky breath. "You were so little," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think it would ever come back to haunt us." Scarlett's heart skipped a beat. "Come back to haunt us, Nana. What are you talking about?" Mildred's hands trembled as she reached for the glass of water on the table. After taking a small sip, she met Scarlett's gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Your mother, Scarlett, Cynthia Matthews, she was my daughter-in-law. You're her child." Scarlett blinked, the words taking a moment to register. "My mother," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "You mean she was related to the Matthews family?" Mildred nodded, her expression heavy with the burden of long-kept secrets. "Cynthia fell in love with my son, your father, but he wasn't from their world. He worked as a driver for the Matthews family, and their relationship was frowned upon." Scarlett's chest tightened. "Frowned upon. That's putting it lightly, isn't it?" Mildred sighed deeply, her voice tinged with bitterness. "They tried to keep them apart. Scarlett, when Cynthia became pregnant with you, the Matthews family was furious. They forced her to cut ties with your father and sent her away to have you in secret. She came to me. She begged me to take care of you, to protect you from the life they wanted to impose on her. I couldn't say no." Scarlett's mind reeled. The story felt both surreal and painfully real, like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you," Mildred said, her voice trembling. "After Cynthia disappeared, after she stopped writing, I thought it was best to leave it all behind." "You were safe, Scarlett. That's all that mattered to me." Tears stung Scarlett's eyes as she tried to process the revelation. Her mother was Cynthia Matthews, a woman who had been stripped of her family and silenced by powerful forces. And now, years later, Scarlett had unknowingly walked into the very house that had cast her mother aside. That night, Scarlett lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The photo, the journal, the whispers about Logan's mother, all of it pointed to a deeper truth. Scarlett's connection to the Matthews family wasn't just personal, it was tangled in the fabric of their history. A history that seemed to hold more shadows than light. Her thoughts turned to Logan. Did he know about her? Did he even care? He had grown up in a house that had cast her mother out, yet he seemed haunted by his own struggles, particularly the disappearance of his mother. "I have to know more," Scarlett whispered to herself. She couldn't let this be the end of her search. The next morning, Scarlett approached her shift at the mansion with a new determination. As she dusted the grand hall, she found herself studying every detail with fresh eyes. The opulence that had once intimidated her now felt like a mask, hiding decades of secrets. When Mrs. Henderson passed by, Scarlett mustered her courage. "Mrs. Henderson," she began hesitantly, "can I ask you something about Mr. Matthews?" The housekeeper arched an eyebrow, but didn't stop walking. "Depends on what you're asking," she replied curtly. Scarlett hurried to keep up with her. "I was just wondering about his family. I heard some of the staff talking about his mother. What happened to her?" Mrs. Henderson paused, turning to fix Scarlett with a sharp gaze. "You'd do well to keep your nose out of things that don't concern you," she said, her tone icy. "Mr. Matthews values his privacy, and so do I." Scarlett nodded quickly, retreating under the weight of the housekeeper's glare. But even as she resumed her duties, her resolve only strengthened. The truth about her past and her mother's connection to the Matthews family was within reach, and Scarlett wasn't going to stop until she uncovered it. The morning sun poured through the massive windows of the Matthews mansion, casting intricate patterns on the marble floors. Scarlett worked quietly, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The revelations from her grandmother weighed heavily on her, but they also fueled a sense of urgency. She had lived her entire life in the dark about her past, and now the answers seemed just within reach. As Scarlett polished the banister of the grand staircase, she noticed Logan's bedroom door slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. She had promised herself she wouldn't snoop, but the pull of that room, the photo, the journal, was too strong to ignore. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, Scarlett pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was just as she remembered, pristine, masculine, and deeply private. Her gaze drifted back to the framed photo of her childhood. Her fingers hovered over the glass, as if touching it might make the truth feel more tangible. But it wasn't just the photo she was after today. Her eyes scanned the bookshelves and the drawers, searching for more clues. She hesitated at the thought of invading Logan's privacy, but the need to know outweighed her guilt. On a lower shelf, Scarlett noticed a stack of old boxes. She crouched down, pulling out one marked with Cynthia in bold, elegant handwriting. Her pulse quickened. Inside, she found letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Some of the letters were addressed to Dearest Logan, while others were from what appeared to be a lawyer. One particular letter caught her eye. The handwriting was familiar, florid and deliberate, like the notes her grandmother sometimes wrote. Scarlett's breath hitched as she read, "To whom it may concern, I cannot allow my daughter to grow up in this house. Under these circumstances, the Matthews name is both a blessing and a curse, and I will not have her suffer for it. I trust you will understand my decision. Please know that I only want what's best for her. Cynthia Matthews." Scarlett's hand trembled as she folded the letter back into the envelope. The words confirmed everything her grandmother had said, and more. Cynthia had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect her child. But at what cost? Scarlett felt a pang of sadness for the mother she had never known. A woman torn between love and duty. Scarlett was so absorbed in the letter that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. The sound of the door opening made her jump, and she turned to see Logan standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his sharp eyes locking onto her. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. His voice cold and clipped. Scarlett's mind raced for an explanation. I was just cleaning," she stammered, holding the letter behind her back. Logan stepped closer, his towering presence filling the room. "Cleaning," he repeated, his tone skeptical. His gaze shifted to the box on the floor, then to her trembling hands. "What's that?" Scarlett hesitated, but she knew there was no point in lying. Slowly, she held out the letter. Logan snatched it from her grasp and read it, his brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the page. When he finished, he looked at her with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Where did you find this?" he demanded. "In the box," Scarlett admitted quietly. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy, I swear. I needed to know more about her, about Cynthia." Logan's eyes narrowed, And why would that matter to you? Scarlett took a deep breath, summoning her courage. Because she was my mother. For a moment, Logan didn't move. His expression hardened, and Scarlett couldn't tell if he was angry, shocked, or both. Your mother, he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, Scarlett said, her voice shaking. My grandmother told me everything. Cynthia Matthews was my mother. She had me with a man your family didn't approve of, and she gave me up to protect me. Logan's jaw tightened, and he turned away, running a hand through his hair. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the weight of Scarlett's confession hanging between them. When Logan finally spoke, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. Do you have any idea what you're saying? My mother disappeared 20 years ago. She left me behind without a word, and now you're telling me she had another child. That you're that child. Scarlett nodded, her throat dry. I didn't know any of this until yesterday, but it's the truth. She left me with my grandmother to protect me from this family. Logan laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. Protect you from this family. That sounds about right. The Matthews name is a curse. Scarlett's heart ached at his words. She had come here searching for answers, but now she wondered if she had brought more pain into Logan's life. I didn't mean to disrupt anything, she said softly. I just wanted to know the truth. Logan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. The truth, he repeated, his voice heavy. You're not the only one looking for it. Scarlett stared at him, confused. What do you mean? Logan hesitated, then gestured to the box. There are things about my mother's disappearance that never made sense. I've been trying to piece it together for years, and now you show up claiming to be her daughter, if that's true. Maybe you're the missing piece I've been looking for. Scarlett swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had come here searching for her past, but it seemed she had stumbled into something much bigger than she had imagined. The following morning, Scarlett arrived at the mansion with a sense of unease lingering in her chest. Her conversation with Logan the day before had been both unexpected and overwhelming, though he hadn't dismissed her outright. His reaction had been distant and laced with skepticism. Scarlett couldn't blame him. She herself was still coming to terms with everything she'd learned. As she entered the grand hall, the usual bustle of staff preparing the house for the day greeted her. Scarlett busied herself with her assigned tasks, focusing on polishing the crystal sconces lining the walls. Still, her mind wandered to Logan's parting words. Maybe you're the missing piece I've been looking for. The thought both excited and terrified her. If Logan was willing to pursue the truth, it could lead to more revelations about her mother, but the coldness in his voice made it clear that he wasn't fully ready to accept her. Later that day, Scarlett was dusting the massive library. When the sound of footsteps echoed behind her, she turned to see Logan entering the room, his expression unreadable. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a dark suit that seemed to match the stern lines of his face. You're here early, Scarlett said, trying to keep her tone neutral. I wanted to speak with you, Logan replied, his voice as sharp as the cut of his jacket. Privately, Scarlett set down her cleaning cloth, her stomach nodding. Okay, what is it? Logan gestured for her to sit, but he remained standing, his presence towering over her. I thought about what you said yesterday, he began, his tone measured. About being my mother's daughter. Scarlett nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going. I won't lie to you, Logan continued. This is difficult for me to believe. My mother disappeared without a trace when I was young. For years, I told myself she abandoned us, and now you're here, claiming not only that she had another child, but that she left you behind to protect you from this family. He let out a bitter laugh. Do you know how that sounds? I understand how it must sound to you, Scarlett said, keeping her voice steady. But it's the truth. My grandmother didn't want to tell me, but I found the photo. Logan, I found the letter in your room. Everything points to the same thing. Your mother was my mother too. Logan's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Do you have any proof? Something concrete? Scarlett hesitated. She had her grandmother's word and the letters, but nothing beyond that. I'm still piecing things together, she admitted. But doesn't this explain why your mother disappeared? Doesn't it make sense that she was forced to leave to protect her child? Logan's lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe, but making sense isn't enough. I need facts, Scarlett, not assumptions. The tension between them was palpable, the weight of unspoken emotions filling the room. Scarlett stood, meeting Logan's gaze with determination. "Then help me," she said, her voice firmer now. "If you want facts, let's find them together. We're both searching for the same thing, aren't we? The truth about your mother." Logan's expression softened, just barely. "You're bold. I'll give you that," he said with a faint smirk. "But don't think this means I trust you yet." "I'm not asking you to trust me," Scarlett replied. "I'm asking you to trust the evidence. If we dig deeper, we'll find the answers we're both looking for." Logan studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes searching hers. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but if we do this, we do it my way. Understood?" Scarlett nodded. Understood. The uneasy alliance between them was tested almost immediately. Logan insisted on controlling the investigation, assigning Scarlett specific tasks to help gather information. He gave her access to certain parts of the mansion, but forbade her from venturing into areas he deemed off-limits. One of those areas was his late father's study. Logan had mentioned in passing that his father had kept meticulous records about the family's affairs, but he seemed reluctant to let Scarlett anywhere near them. "Why can't I look in there?" Scarlett asked one afternoon as they stood in the library. Logan crossed his arms. "Because that room is personal," he said firmly. "If there's something important in there, I'll find it myself." Scarlett bit back her frustration. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy, Logan, but if your father kept records, don't you think they might hold clues about your mother?" Logan's gaze hardened. "I said I'll handle it." Despite their differences, Scarlett couldn't deny that Logan was thorough. Over the next few days, he shared old family documents with her, including letters and financial records that painted a clearer picture of the Matthews family's troubled history. The more Scarlett learned, the more she understood why Cynthia had felt trapped. The Matthews family had always prioritized their reputation above all else, enforcing strict expectations on its members. Logan had grown up under those same pressures, and Scarlett couldn't help but wonder how they had shaped him into the man he was now. Cold, distant, and guarded. One evening, as Scarlett sifted through a box of documents in the library, she came across a faded photograph of Cynthia. Her heart ached at the sight of the elegant woman with kind eyes who had given up everything to protect her. "Is that her?" Logan's voice startled Scarlett, and she turned to see him standing behind her. "Yes," Scarlett said softly. "She looks so kind." Logan nodded, his expression distant. "She was, but she was also strong. Stronger than I ever gave her credit for." For the first time, Scarlett saw a flicker of vulnerability in Logan's eyes. It was a small moment, but it reminded her that beneath his icy exterior was a man who had been deeply hurt by the same mysteries they were now trying to unravel. "Maybe we'll finally get the answers she wanted us to have," Scarlett said quietly. "Maybe," Logan replied, but his tone was heavy with doubt. And Scarlett knew their journey was far from over. Scarlett sat by the window that evening, her thoughts restless as the dim light of the setting sun bathed the room in warm hues. The weight of her conversation with Logan lingered, but it was clear there was only one person who could provide the answers she needed now. Her grandmother. She turned to Mildred, who sat quietly in her usual chair, her knitting needles still for once. Scarlett hesitated before speaking. "Nana," she began softly, "I need to know everything. I need you to tell me the truth. About my mother, about why she left me. Please don't keep anything else from me." Mildred looked up slowly, her face drawn with exhaustion, and something else Scarlett couldn't quite place. Regret. She set down the knitting and folded her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on them as if searching for courage. "I didn't want this to resurface, Scarlett," Mildred said after a long pause. Her voice was heavy with emotion. "I wanted you to live a simple, happy life without all this pain. But maybe it's time." Scarlett leaned forward, her heart racing. "Time for what, Nana?" Mildred's sigh seemed to carry years of suppressed sorrow. "To tell you the truth about your mother." Mildred's voice wavered as she began her story, but her words were clear and deliberate. "Your mother, Cynthia, was a kind and spirited woman. She came from the Matthews family, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the state, but that wealth came with expectations, rules, and an image to maintain. Cynthia hated it. She always did. She longed for freedom, for a life where she could choose her own path. Scarlett nodded, encouraging her to continue. She found that freedom when she met your father, Mildred said, her lips curving into a bittersweet smile. He was a driver for the Matthews family, a simple, hard-working man who treated her like a person, not an obligation or a pawn in some family game. They fell in love, but their relationship was doomed from the start. The Matthews family would never allow it. Scarlett's hands gripped the edge of her chair. What happened to him? Mildred's expression darkened. When they found out Cynthia was pregnant with you, they fired your father and forced her to cut all ties with him. They told her if she didn't end things, they'd ruin his life. And hers? She was desperate, Scarlett. She knew she couldn't raise you in that environment, not with their judgment and control hanging over her. So she left me with you, Scarlett said, her voice trembling. Mildred nodded. She came to me when she was nearly due. She begged me to take care of you, to raise you away from the Matthews family's reach. She said it was the only way to keep you safe. Scarlett felt tears welling in her eyes. But why didn't she stay with us? Why didn't she fight for us? Mildred hesitated, her fingers knotting together. She planned to come back for you. She promised she would. But then, she disappeared. One day, her letters stopped. I tried to reach out to her, but there was no response. I feared the worst, Scarlett. And without her, I thought it was best to keep you far away from the Matthews family and their poison. Scarlett wiped her eyes, her emotions swinging between sadness and anger. So you've known all along that I was connected to them, and you just never told me. I thought I was protecting you, Mildred said quietly. And maybe I was protecting myself too. I didn't want to face the possibility that Cynthia might be gone for good. Scarlett stood and began pacing, her mind reeling. Logan deserves to know this, she said. He's been searching for answers about his mother too. Maybe together, we can figure out what really happened to her. Mildred's face twisted with concern. Be careful, Scarlett. The Matthews family isn't just wealthy. They're powerful if they sense you're digging into their past. They won't take kindly to it. Scarlett stopped, meeting her grandmother's worried gaze. I don't care how powerful they are, Nana. This is about my mother. And me. I have to know the truth. Mildred sighed, her shoulders slumping. Just promise me you'll be careful. I will, Scarlett said firmly. The next day, Scarlett returned to the mansion with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't tell Logan about her conversation with Mildred right away, wanting to process the information herself first. As she moved through her duties, she found herself drawn back to the library, where Logan was seated at a large desk surrounded by piles of papers and old records. Still working? She asked, her voice light but curious. Logan looked up, his expression tired but focused. Always, he replied dryly. What about you? Found anything interesting in your cleaning adventures? Scarlett hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. I talked to my grandmother last night, she said finally. Logan set down the pen in his hand, his attention now fully on her. And she told me everything, Scarlett said, about my mother, about why she left me with her. Logan's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. And what did she say? Scarlett took a deep breath. She said my mother didn't leave by choice. She was forced out by your family. For a moment, Logan didn't respond. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. That's not surprising, he said finally, his tone bitter. It's exactly the kind of thing they would do. Scarlett stepped closer. Logan, if this is true, then the answers we're looking for might not just be about my mother. They might be about yours too. Logan's gaze sharpened, and Scarlett could see the wheels turning in his mind. Then we keep digging, he said. But Scarlett, if we do this, we're playing with fire. Are you ready for that? Scarlett nodded without hesitation. I am. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the library windows as Scarlett and Logan worked in near silence, their focus unbroken. The room, usually a place of quiet elegance, had become a makeshift war room. Stacks of documents, photographs, and letters lay scattered across the large mahogany table, each a potential piece of the puzzle they were desperate to solve. Scarlett leaned over an old ledger, her fingers tracing the faded ink. This looks like an inventory list, she murmured, her brow furrowing. But why would a family like yours need such detailed records of personal belongings? Logan glanced up from the papers in front of him, his sharp eyes narrowing. My father was meticulous about tracking everything, especially after my mother disappeared. He thought she might have taken something with her. A clue, a piece of evidence. Did she? Scarlett asked, curious. No, Logan said bitterly, leaning back in his chair. At least not that he could prove. He spent years chasing shadows. Scarlett set the ledger aside, her gaze drifting to the faded photograph of Cynthia they had found earlier. Your father sounds intense. He was, Logan admitted. He was also controlling, manipulative, and paranoid. Everything he did was about protecting the family name, no matter the cost. Scarlett looked at him, her heart aching, despite her own anger toward the Matthews family. That must have been hard for you. Logan shrugged, his expression unreadable. It was just how things were. You learned to live with it. As the hours ticked by, Scarlett's frustration grew. Every document they uncovered seemed to raise more questions than answers. She finally pushed her chair back with a groan, rubbing her temples. We're getting nowhere. Logan's gaze flicked to her, and for the first time, a hint of amusement crossed his face. Giving up already. I'm not giving up, Scarlett snapped, though her tone lacked venom. I feel like we're missing something. Like the answers are right in front of us, but we're not seeing them. Logan stood and began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. It's possible, but we have to keep digging. There's too much at stake to stop now. Scarlett watched him for a moment, her mind racing. Logan, she said cautiously, there's something I haven't told you yet. He stopped pacing, turning to face her. What is it? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. My grandmother told me that your mother planned to come back for me. She promised she would, but then she disappeared. That's why my grandmother always assumed something terrible happened to her. Logan's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. That lines up with what I've suspected for years. My mother didn't just leave. She was forced out, silenced. And if that's true, then someone in my family knows what happened to her. Do you have any idea who it could be? Scarlett asked. Logan shook his head. No, but I know where we might find out. Later that evening, Logan led Scarlett to a part of the mansion she hadn't been allowed to access before, his father's private study. The room was exactly as she'd imagined. Dark wood paneling, towering bookshelves, and an air of authority that felt almost oppressive. Logan moved with purpose, opening drawers and scanning the shelves. Scarlett followed closely, her eyes darting around the room. She noticed a locked cabinet in the corner and pointed to it. What's in there? Logan glanced at the cabinet and frowned. That's where my father kept the family's most sensitive documents. It hasn't been opened since he passed. Do you have the key? Scarlett asked. No, Logan admitted, his tone clipped. But I have another way. He retrieved a small toolkit from a nearby drawer and began working on the lock. Scarlett watched in astonishment as he deftly picked it open. Where did you learn to do that? Logan smirked, though there was no humor in it. Let's just say I've had to bypass a few locked doors in my time. The cabinet door creaked open, revealing a collection of leather-bound journals and thick envelopes. Logan pulled them out carefully, his eyes scanning the labels. These are my father's personal records, he said, his voice tinged with both anticipation and dread. If there's anything about my mother, or your mother, it'll be in here. They worked late into the night, poring over the journals and envelopes. Scarlett felt a mix of excitement and unease as they uncovered more details about the Matthews family's inner workings. One journal entry in particular caught her attention. Cynthia has become a liability. Her actions threaten everything this family has built. I will do what is necessary to protect our legacy, even if it means making difficult choices. Scarlett's blood ran cold. Logan, look at this, she said, sliding the journal toward him. He read the entry silently, his jaw clenching as he processed the words. This confirms it, he said finally, his voice low. My father saw my mother as a threat. He must have been involved in her disappearance. Scarlett nodded, her chest tightening. And if he was willing to do that to her, what does that mean for us? If someone else in your family finds out what we're doing? They won't, Logan said firmly. We'll make sure of it. Scarlett wasn't so sure, but she nodded anyway. For the first time, she and Logan were on the same page, united in their pursuit of the truth. But as she looked at the ominous words in the journal, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they had anticipated the following day. Scarlett arrived at the mansion to find Logan waiting for her in the library. His normally composed demeanor was slightly off. There was a tension in his posture, a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I found something last night after you left," he said without preamble, gesturing to a stack of papers on the table. Scarlett approached cautiously, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Logan handed her a worn envelope. The edges were frayed, and the handwriting on the front was faded but still legible. It was addressed to someone named Howard Matthews, Logan's father. "I haven't opened it yet," Logan admitted. "I wanted to wait until you got here." Scarlett looked at him. Surprised? "Why?" Logan hesitated, then shrugged. "Because this involves both of us now, and because if what's inside confirms what I think, I'm going to need someone on my side." Scarlett nodded, the weight of his words settling over her. Together, they carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the yellowed paper inside. The letter was short, but its contents hit like a punch to the gut. "Howard, I have made my decision. I will not allow Cynthia to ruin this family's reputation. She has overstepped her bounds for the last time, and I intend to resolve the matter permanently." Scarlett's eyes widened. She whispered, looking up at Logan. "My uncle, Edward Matthews," Logan said grimly. His jaw was tight, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "He was my father's younger brother, always the enforcer, the one who handled the family's messier business." "You think he's the one who—" Scarlett began, but Logan cut her off. "I don't think," he said sharply. "I know, this letter proves it. Edward was the one who made my mother disappear." Scarlett felt a chill run down her spine. "But why? What could Cynthia have done that was so bad?" "She existed," Logan said bitterly. "In their eyes, that was enough. The discovery changed everything." Logan's focus sharpened, and he became more determined than ever to uncover the full extent of Edward's involvement. He and Scarlett pored over more documents, searching for anything that might connect Edward to Cynthia's disappearance. Hours passed, and the tension in the library grew heavier with each passing minute. Finally, Scarlett broke the silence. "Logan, do you think Edward knows about me?" Logan paused, his eyes narrowing. "It's possible," he said slowly. "If he knew about Cynthia's pregnancy, he might have known she gave the baby to someone else to raise." Scarlett shuddered at the thought. "What if he tries to come after me?" Logan's expression darkened. "He won't," he said firmly. "I won't let him." The certainty in his voice gave Scarlett some comfort, but it didn't erase her fear. The Matthews family had already proven how far they were willing to go to protect their legacy. If Edward found out she was digging into the past, there was no telling what he might do. That evening, Logan made a decision. "I need to confront him," he told Scarlett as they stood in the grand hall. "If Edward is responsible, he needs to answer for it." Scarlett's eyes widened. "Confront him, Logan. That's dangerous. He's not just going to admit to anything, especially not to you." Logan's expression was cold and determined. "I don't care. I've spent years living in the shadow of this family's lies. It's time for some answers." Scarlett hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm. "If you're going to do this, at least let me help." Logan shook his head. "No, it's too risky. I'm already involved," Scarlett argued. "You can't just shut me out now." For a moment, Logan looked like he might argue, but then he sighed. "Fine, but we do this carefully. No rash decisions, no unnecessary risks." Scarlett nodded, relieved. "Agreed." The next day, Logan arranged a meeting with Edward under the pretense of discussing family business. He didn't tell Scarlett where the meeting would take place, only that it would happen at a private club Edward frequented. Scarlett hated the secrecy, but she trusted Logan to handle it, at least for now. While Logan was gone, Scarlett stayed at the mansion, restless and on edge. She couldn't stop thinking about the letter or the look on Logan's face when he read it. For all his composure, she could tell he was barely holding himself together. Hours passed before Logan returned. Scarlett met him in the library, where he sank into a chair with a weary sigh. His usually sharp appearance was slightly disheveled, and there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Well?" Scarlett asked anxiously. "What happened?" Logan rubbed his temples. his jaw tight. He denied everything, of course. Claimed the letter wasn't his. Said I was grasping at straws. Scarlett frowned. But you don't believe him. Not for a second, Logan said darkly. He was too defensive. Too eager to brush it all off. He knows something, Scarlett. I'm sure of it, but he's not going to admit it easily. Scarlett sat down across from him, her mind racing. So, what do we do now? Logan's expression hardened. We keep digging. If Edward won't tell us the truth, we'll find it ourselves. Scarlett nodded, her determination matching his. They were closer than ever to uncovering the truth about Cynthia's disappearance. But the stakes had never been higher. With Edward now on their radar, they couldn't afford to make a single misstep. As Scarlett glanced at the letter once more, she felt a growing sense of unease. The Matthews family's secrets ran deep, and she had a feeling they were only scratching the surface. The tension in the mansion grew thicker. In the days following Logan's confrontation with Edward, Scarlett could feel it in the way Logan moved. More deliberate, more guarded. His icy composure had cracked just enough to reveal the turmoil underneath. And though he tried to hide it, Scarlett saw the weight of his family's secrets pressing down on him. She spent her mornings in the library, sorting through more of the Matthews family's meticulously kept records. Logan had given her access to several boxes of his father's private papers, hoping they might find something Edward missed. Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that every page she turned brought her closer to something explosive. One evening, after hours of fruitless searching, Scarlett leaned back in her chair with a sigh. Logan sat across the table, his eyes scanning yet another ledger. The silence between them was comfortable. But Scarlett decided to break it. "Logan," she began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" Logan didn't look up from the page in front of him. "You can ask," he said, his tone neutral. Scarlett hesitated. "Why do you care so much about this? About finding out what happened to your mother?" That made Logan pause. He set the ledger down, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. "Why wouldn't I care?" he asked, his voice tinged with something between curiosity and defensiveness. "It's just..." Scarlett struggled to find the right words. "You've built this life for yourself. Successful, respected, untouchable. Why dig into something that could bring all of that crashing down?" Logan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Because none of it matters," he said simply. "The money, the reputation, the power. It's all meaningless without answers. My mother deserved better than what she got, and so do you." Scarlett blinked, taken aback by the raw honesty in his voice. "Me?" Logan nodded. "If what we're uncovering is true, then you've been a victim of this family's selfishness just as much as she was. You lost your mother because they decided their reputation was more important than her happiness. You deserve the truth as much as I do." Scarlett felt her throat tighten. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, insignificant. To hear Logan acknowledge her pain, to see him fighting alongside her, made her feel seen. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying that." Logan gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a long way to go." The following day, Scarlett noticed a shift in the way Logan interacted with her. He was still guarded, still sharp-tongued at times, but there was a subtle warmth in his demeanor, a willingness to let her in. She found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected, not just as an ally in uncovering the truth, but as someone she genuinely admired. That afternoon, Logan approached Scarlett as she was organizing another box of documents in the library. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against the edge of the table. "That sounds dangerous," Scarlett quipped, unable to resist teasing him. Logan smirked, a rare expression on his usually stoic face. "Funny, but I'm serious. I've been thinking about how we can get Edward to slip up." Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "You mean make him admit something?" "Exactly," Logan said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "He's careful, but everyone has a weakness. We just need to find his." "And how do you propose we do that?" Scarlett asked, crossing her arms. Logan's smirk widened, by reminding him that he's not as untouchable as he thinks. Scarlett tilted her head. Intrigued. "Go on." Logan explained his plan, which involved leveraging Edward's paranoia against him. "My uncle is obsessed with control," Logan said. "If he thinks someone has evidence against him, anything that could threaten his position, he'll panic. And when he panics, he'll make mistakes. Scarlett frowned. But what kind of evidence are we talking about? We don't have anything concrete yet. Not yet, Logan admitted. But we can make him believe we do. Plant the idea. Let him stew in it. He'll start to slip, and when he does, we'll be ready. Scarlett hesitated. That sounds risky. It is, Logan agreed. But it's our best shot. Edward won't confess willingly. We have to push him. Scarlett nodded slowly. Okay, I'm in. But we need to be careful if he finds out what we're doing. He won't, Logan said firmly. I won't let him. That evening, Scarlett sat by the fireplace in the library, reflecting on how far she and Logan had come. When she first started working at the mansion, she had seen him as nothing more than a cold, unapproachable figure, a man shaped by privilege and power. But now, she saw the layers beneath the surface. Logan wasn't just a product of his family's wealth. He was a man driven by pain, by guilt, and by a deep desire to right the wrongs of his past. She wondered if he saw her the same way, if he had looked past her humble beginnings to see her strength, her determination. The thought made her chest tighten in a way she wasn't ready to examine. Logan entered the room then, his presence commanding as always. He looked at her for a moment, his expression softer than usual. You should get some rest, he said. We have a lot to do tomorrow. Scarlett nodded, standing and gathering her things. Good night, Logan. Good night, Scarlett, he replied, his voice quieter than she expected. As Scarlett walked to her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted. They were no longer just two people seeking answers. They were partners, bound by a shared purpose, and perhaps something more. The morning air was crisp as Scarlett entered the library, her steps quieter than usual. The mansion felt oddly still, as if the weight of its secrets had seeped into its very walls. She found Logan already there, hunched over the table, papers and photographs spread out before him. His disheveled appearance, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, was a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. Have you slept at all? Scarlett asked, her voice soft but concerned. Logan looked up, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Barely, he admitted. I couldn't stop going through these. I think I've found something. Scarlett's heart quickened as she moved closer. What is it? Logan held up a small stack of photographs. They were old, the edges yellowed, but the images were clear enough. One photo showed his mother, Cynthia, standing in front of a grand piano, her expression serene. But it was the second photo that caught Scarlett's attention. Cynthia standing next to a man Scarlett didn't recognize, holding hands in a way that suggested intimacy. That's your father, Logan said quietly, his voice heavy. Scarlett stared at the image, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. He looks kind, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was, Logan replied. At least, that's what I've been able to piece together. My mother's letters mentioned him a few times. She wrote about how he made her feel free, how he gave her something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Scarlett's throat tightened. You read her letters? Logan nodded, his expression somber. After my father died, I found a box hidden in his study. It was full of her things. Letters, photos, even some of her jewelry. It was the first time I'd seen the side of her she never showed us. Scarlett sat down across from him, her gaze fixed on the photo. What else did she write about him? Logan hesitated, his fingers brushing the edges of the photograph. She wrote about how much she loved him, how she wanted to leave this life behind and start fresh with him and their child. Scarlett's breath hitched. Their child, she repeated. You mean me? Logan nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, she wrote about you, Scarlett, about how much she wanted to be with you, but she also wrote about how impossible it felt. She was trapped by our family, by expectations, by everything that came with being a Matthews. Scarlett felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to protect me, she murmured. That's why she left. Exactly, Logan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She sacrificed everything to give you a chance at a better life, but that choice cost her everything too. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of Cynthia's story hanging between them. Scarlett wiped her eyes and straightened up, her determination returning. We need to find out what happened to her, Logan. She deserves justice. Logan's expression hardened, and he nodded. I agree, and I think I know where to start. He pulled out a folder from the pile of documents and opened it, revealing a series of bank statements. Scarlett frowned, leaning closer. What are these? Payments, Logan said. Regular payments made by my Uncle Edward to an unknown account. They started shortly after my mother disappeared and continued for years. Scarlett's eyes widened. Do you think he was paying someone to keep quiet? Logan nodded grimly. It's possible. These amounts are too large to be routine business expenses. He was hiding something, or someone. Scarlett's mind raced. Do we know who the account belongs to? Not yet, Logan admitted, but I have a contact who might be able to help us trace it. Scarlett studied him, her admiration for his determination growing. You're not going to stop until you find the truth, are you? No, Logan said simply. I can't. Later that day, Logan stepped out to make arrangements with his contact, leaving Scarlett alone in the library. She used the quiet time to sort through more of the documents, her thoughts a jumble of emotions. The more she learned about Cynthia, the more she felt a connection to the mother she had never known, and the more she saw Logan's drive to uncover the truth, the more she realized how deeply he cared, not just about Cynthia, but about Scarlett too. As she sifted through a pile of letters, Scarlett came across one she hadn't noticed before. It was addressed to Logan, but it had never been opened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something about it gave her pause. She hesitated, then called Logan on her phone. Logan, she said when he picked up. I found something. A letter addressed to you. It looks old, like it's been sitting here for years. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Logan replied, his tone sharp with urgency. True to his word, Logan arrived a short time later, his coat still draped over his arm. Scarlett handed him the letter, and he opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the handwritten words as he read. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to a simmering anger. When he finished, he set the letter down, his hands clenched into fists. What does it say? Scarlett asked, her voice tinged with worry. Logan took a deep breath, his jaw tight. It's from someone who worked for my uncle. They wrote to warn me. About Edward. About what he did to my mother. They wanted me to know the truth. But for some reason, this letter was never delivered. Scarlett's eyes widened. What does that mean? Someone intercepted it. Most likely, Logan said darkly. Edward must have found out and made sure I never saw it. Scarlett felt a chill run down her spine. So what do we do now? Logan looked at her, his gaze fierce. We find this person if they're still alive. They might be the key to everything. As the two of them prepared to follow this new lead, Scarlett couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For the first time, it felt like they were on the verge of uncovering the truth. But the deeper they delved into the Matthews family's secrets, the more dangerous the path ahead seemed. Scarlett and Logan spent the next morning making discreet inquiries about the letter's author. The name scrawled at the bottom, Miriam Collins, was unfamiliar to both of them, but Logan suspected she had once worked as a housekeeper or secretary for Edward Matthews. If she was still alive, she might hold the key to everything. Logan placed several calls, using his network of contacts to trace Miriam's whereabouts. Scarlett watched as he worked, his voice steady and authoritative. She marveled at his composure, even as the stakes grew higher with every passing hour. By midday, Logan hung up the phone with a decisive click and turned to Scarlett. I found her, he said. She's living in a retirement home about an hour from here. Scarlett's heart leapt. Do you think she'll talk to us? Logan's jaw tightened. She will. She has to. The drive to the retirement home was quiet but charged with anticipation. Scarlett glanced at Logan occasionally, noting the tension in his expression. He was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. She wanted to say something to ease his mind but couldn't find the words. Instead, she focused on the road ahead, hoping they were finally about to get the answers they'd been searching for. When they arrived, a kind nurse directed them to Miriam's room. Scarlett hesitated outside the door, glancing at Logan. Do you think she'll remember? Logan nodded. If she wrote that letter, she'll remember. Taking a deep breath, Scarlett knocked gently. A soft voice called out, Come in, and they stepped inside. Miriam Collins was a petite woman in her 80s, her gray hair neatly styled and her eyes sharp despite her age. She looked up from her knitting as they entered, her gaze landing on Logan. For a moment, she studied him intently, then her expression softened. "You're a Matthews," she said simply. Setting her knitting aside, Logan nodded. "Yes, my name is Logan Matthews, and this is Scarlett. We came to ask you about a letter you wrote years ago." Miriam's brow furrowed. "A letter," she repeated. Then her eyes widened, and she leaned back in her chair, her face pale. "I thought that letter was lost. I never heard back." "You're talking about the one warning me about my uncle," Logan prompted gently. "Yes," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "I knew I shouldn't have written it, but I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Your mother didn't deserve what happened to her." Scarlett stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What happened to her, please? We need to know." Miriam hesitated, her gaze flicking between Logan and Scarlett. "Your uncle, Edward. He was ruthless. He always had to be in control, no matter the cost. When your mother, Cynthia, started defying the family's rules, he saw her as a threat. And when he found out about the child," she trailed off, looking at Scarlett with an expression of quiet recognition. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. "Me," she whispered. Miriam nodded. "Yes. When Edward found out about you, he was furious. He thought Cynthia was risking the family's reputation. He convinced your father, Howard, that Cynthia was dangerous, that she needed to be removed from the picture." Logan's voice was cold and steady. "What do you mean by removed?" Miriam's hands shook as she reached for a glass of water. After taking a sip, she said, "They forced her out. Your uncle arranged everything, had her sent away to a place where she couldn't cause any more trouble. But that wasn't enough for Edward. He wanted to make sure she couldn't come back." Scarlett's stomach churned. "Are you saying he killed her?" Miriam's face crumpled with sorrow. "I don't know for certain," she admitted, "but I know she never returned, and Edward made sure no one asked questions. He silenced anyone who got too curious." Logan stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. Scarlett could see the storm brewing in his eyes. The anger, the grief, the guilt. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "Logan," she said softly, "we'll figure this out." Miriam continued, her voice trembling. "I wanted to tell someone, but Edward was powerful. He had eyes everywhere. I was terrified. That's why I wrote the letter. I thought maybe you could do something." "You were right to write it," Logan said, his voice tight. "And now it's time to finish what you started." As they left the retirement home, Scarlett felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a renewed determination to uncover the full truth. Logan was quiet as they walked to the car, his expression unreadable. Once they were on the road, Scarlett broke the silence. "What do we do now?" Logan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We confront him." "Edward?" Scarlett asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Logan, he's dangerous. You heard what Miriam said." "I don't care," Logan snapped. Then softer, "I can't let this go, Scarlett. He's taken too much from me, from us. It's time he answered for it." Scarlett nodded, her resolve matching his. "Okay, but we do this together." Logan glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Together," he agreed, as they pulled into the driveway of the Matthews mansion. Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something far more dangerous than they anticipated. Edward wouldn't go down without a fight, and whatever he was hiding, he would protect it at all costs. But Scarlett and Logan had come too far to turn back now. For Cynthia, for themselves, and for the truth. They would face whatever came next. The Matthews mansion loomed ominously as Scarlett and Logan approached, their determination outweighing the sense of foreboding that clung to the air. The conversation with Miriam had solidified their suspicions, but it also meant stepping into uncharted territory, confronting a man who had built his life around silencing truths. Logan led the way, his steps deliberate as he pushed open the grand front door. The house was quiet, the usual bustle of staff conspicuously absent. Scarlett glanced around, the stillness making her skin prickle. "Where is everyone?" she whispered. "I gave the staff the afternoon off," Logan replied. "I didn't want any distractions." Scarlett nodded, though the emptiness only amplified her unease. Logan had summoned Edward under the pretense of discussing estate matters. and the thought of facing him made her stomach churn. She couldn't tell if it was fear or anticipation, or both. They didn't have to wait long. The heavy thud of footsteps echoed through the marble-floored hallway, and moments later, Edward Matthews entered the library. He was an imposing figure, his presence commanding even in his 60s. His sharp features and piercing eyes mirrored Logan's, but there was an air of cold calculation about him that sent a chill down Scarlett's spine. "Logan?" Edward said smoothly, his voice betraying no emotion. "What's this about?" Logan remained standing, his posture stiff. "We need to talk." "About Mother." Edward raised an eyebrow. Feigning ignorance. "Your mother, Logan. That's ancient history. Why drag it up now?" "Because it's not history to me," Logan snapped. "Or to Scarlett." He gestured toward her, and Edward's gaze shifted, his eyes narrowing as they settled on her. "And who is this?" Edward asked, his tone laced with condescension. Scarlett stepped forward, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm Cynthia Matthews's daughter." Edward blinked, his composure faltering for a split second before he recovered. "Is that so?" he said coolly. "And what makes you think that?" "I know the truth," Scarlett said, her voice growing stronger. "I know you forced her out of this family. I know you're the reason she disappeared." Edward's expression darkened, and a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "You're making serious accusations, young lady. Be careful where you tread." Logan stepped between them, his tone sharp. "Enough, Edward. We found the letter. We know about the payments. You've been covering your tracks for years, but it's over. Tell us what happened to her." Edward's lips curled into a thin smile. "You always were ambitious, Logan," he said, ignoring the question. "But ambition without control is reckless. Do you really want to dig up the past? It won't bring her back." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. Scarlett could see Logan's fists clench at his sides, his anger barely contained. But before he could respond, Edward took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Edward said, his voice low and menacing. "Cynthia was a liability. She refused to accept her place in this family, and she paid the price for it." Scarlett's heart pounded. "You mean you had her killed?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. Edward's smirk widened. "I didn't say that, but if I had, I'd say it was for the greater good. The Matthews name is bigger than any one person, certainly bigger than her." Logan's voice was like ice. "You're admitting it." "I'm admitting nothing," Edward said smoothly. "But if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions, otherwise, you'll end up regretting it." Scarlett felt a surge of frustration and fury. How could he be so calm, so indifferent? She stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "She was your family. She was my mother. And you think her life was disposable." Edward's expression turned cold. "Family is a burden, not a privilege," he said. "You'd do well to remember that." Before Scarlett could respond, Logan spoke, his tone hard and unyielding. "We're not letting this go, Edward. You can threaten us all you want, but the truth will come out." Edward studied him for a moment, then chuckled darkly. "You've always had a stubborn streak, Logan. I see that hasn't changed." He straightened his jacket, his gaze shifting between them. "But you're playing a dangerous game, and games like this don't end well." After Edward left, the room felt suffocating. Scarlett sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "He's never going to admit it outright," she said, her voice shaky, "but he practically confessed." Logan nodded, his jaw tight. "We have enough to expose him. The letter, the payments, Miriam's testimony, it's all pointing to him." "But if we do," Scarlett said, her voice quieter now, "what happens to us? He won't just let this go." Logan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle it together." Scarlett looked up at him, her fear mingling with a sense of resolve. "I'm not afraid of him," she said, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Logan offered a faint smile. "Good, because neither am I." As they prepared to take their next steps, Scarlett couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were up against. Edward Matthews was powerful, and his reach extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. But for Cynthia, for the mother she never knew, Scarlett was willing to face whatever came next. The next morning, Scarlett woke to an unsettling quiet in her small room at the Matthews mansion. The events of the previous day had left her exhausted. But her resolve was stronger than ever. Logan had already begun gathering the evidence they needed to expose Edward, but Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. She stepped into the grand hall to find Logan pacing near the library. His phone was pressed to his ear, his tone clipped and urgent. "No, I don't care how discreet you are. Just get it done. I want those records by tonight." When he saw Scarlett, he ended the call and turned to her, his expression tense. "We have a problem," he said. Scarlett's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Edward's been moving money," Logan explained. "Large sums, funneled into offshore accounts. It's like he's preparing for something. I think he knows we're closing in." Scarlett nodded, her pulse quickening. "What do we do?" Logan's jaw tightened. "We stay ahead of him. We're meeting with my lawyer this afternoon to make sure everything we've uncovered is secure. If Edward tries to make a move, we'll be ready." The day passed in a blur of preparation. Scarlett and Logan combed through the final pieces of evidence, ensuring every detail was airtight. By the time they left the mansion to meet Logan's lawyer, Scarlett's nerves were frayed, but she clung to the hope that they were nearing the end of their battle. The meeting went smoothly, but as they stepped outside, Scarlett noticed a dark SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and though the vehicle didn't move, its presence felt wrong. She tugged at Logan's sleeve. "Do you see that?" Logan followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low as they walked toward his car. Scarlett felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. A man stepped out of the SUV, his posture tense and purposeful. Before Scarlett could react, another man appeared from behind them, grabbing her arm with a grip like iron. "Logan!" she cried, struggling against the stranger's hold. Logan spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. "Let her go," he shouted, lunging toward Scarlett. But the second man moved swiftly, blocking Logan's path and delivering a brutal punch to his stomach. Logan staggered but didn't fall, his determination outweighing the pain. Scarlett kicked and screamed, but the man dragging her toward the SUV was relentless. "Logan!" she cried again, her voice breaking with fear. Logan fought his way free, landing a solid blow to the man in his path. He reached for Scarlett, his fingers brushing hers just as she was shoved into the vehicle. The door slammed shut, and the SUV sped off, leaving Logan standing in the street, his fists clenched and his face etched with rage. Inside the SUV, Scarlett's heart raced as she struggled against her restraints. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. The man beside her said nothing, his gaze fixed ahead. Scarlett recognized the cold efficiency in his demeanor. It mirrored Edward's, calculated and unyielding. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her tone sharper now. "What does Edward want?" The man finally turned to her, his expression blank. "To send a message," he said simply. Scarlett's stomach twisted. She didn't know where they were taking her, but she knew it wasn't anywhere safe. Back at the mansion, Logan's mind was a storm of panic and fury. He slammed his fist against the library table, the sound echoing through the empty room. Scarlett was gone, taken by Edward's men, and he had no idea where to start looking. His phone buzzed and he snatched it up, hoping for news. The number was unrecognizable, but he answered anyway. "Logan Matthews," he said, his voice sharp. "Mr. Matthews," came a calm, familiar voice. "I assume you know where Scarlett is by now." Logan's grip tightened on the phone. "Edward," he hissed. "If you've hurt her, I wouldn't dream of it," Edward interrupted, his tone dripping with false civility. "But I couldn't let this little investigation of yours go unchecked. You've overstepped, Logan, and now you're going to pay the price." Logan's anger flared. "Let her go." "Edward, she has nothing to do with this." Edward laughed, a low, menacing sound. "Oh, but she has everything to do with this. She's the reason you started digging in the first place. Don't worry, though. I'll take good care of her, as long as you back off." "Back off!" Logan spat. "You think I'm going to stop now? You're delusional." Edward's tone darkened. "Be careful, Logan. You've already lost one parent. Do you want to lose someone else?" The line went dead, leaving Logan gripping the phone in a white-knuckled rage. Scarlett was shoved into a dimly lit room, her wrists still bound. She stumbled but caught herself. her eyes darting around for any sign of escape. The room was small and sparse, with no windows and a single locked door. She sank to the floor, her mind racing. Edward had taken her to silence Logan, to stop their investigation. But Scarlett knew Logan wouldn't give up. He was too stubborn, too determined, and so was she. As the minutes ticked by, Scarlett's fear began to morph into something else. Resolve. Edward might have thought he could intimidate her, but he had underestimated her strength. She would find a way out. She had to, for Cynthia, for Logan, for the truth. The clock in the Matthews mansion ticked loudly. Each passing second a reminder to Logan that Scarlett was still in danger. He stood in the library, his mind racing as he pieced together everything he knew about Edward's operations. His uncle had gone too far, and Logan was determined to end this, once and for all. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find his head of security, a burly man named Carter, holding a tablet. "We tracked the SUV," Carter said without preamble, his tone grim. "It stopped at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city." Logan grabbed the tablet, studying the map. "What do we know about the building?" "Owned by one of Edward's shell companies," Carter replied. "If she's there, it won't be unguarded." Logan's jaw tightened. "Assemble the team. We're leaving now." The drive to the warehouse was tense, the car filled with the hum of quiet determination. Logan sat in the back seat, his fists clenched as he replayed Edward's threats in his mind. Scarlett's face flashed before him. Her courage, her unwavering determination. He couldn't let Edward destroy her, the way he had destroyed so many others. Carter spoke up from the front. "We'll go in quietly, sir. Minimize the risk." Logan nodded, his voice cold and steady. "I'm going in too." "Sir," Carter began to protest, but Logan cut him off. "No arguments. This is my fight." At the warehouse, Logan and his team moved with precision. The building was dark and foreboding, its windows barred and its walls lined with rusted metal. Carter motioned for the team to split up, covering the perimeter while Logan followed close behind. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of oil and damp concrete. Logan's footsteps echoed softly as he moved down the narrow hallway, his eyes scanning every shadow. He held a flashlight in one hand and a small pistol in the other, his senses on high alert. In the distance, he heard voices, low, menacing murmurs. He signaled for Carter to stop, pressing himself against the wall as he strained to listen. "Edward's orders were clear," one of the men said. "We hold her here until he says otherwise." "And if Logan shows up?" the other asked. "Then we deal with him," the first man replied, his tone icy. Logan's grip on his pistol tightened. He glanced at Carter, who nodded in silent agreement. They moved forward, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust covering the floor. In a small, dimly lit room, Scarlett sat on the floor, her wrists still bound. She had tried to free herself, but the restraints were too tight. Her mind raced as she listened to the muffled voices outside, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The door creaked open, and Scarlett tensed. A tall man entered, his face shadowed in the dim light. He crouched in front of her, his expression cold. "You're causing quite a stir," he said, his voice low. "Edward's not happy." Scarlett met his gaze, refusing to show fear. "Good," she said sharply. "He shouldn't be," the man smirked. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but it won't help you here." Before Scarlett could respond, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. The man stood abruptly, drawing his weapon. Scarlett's heart leapt. "Logan." The commotion outside grew louder, and Scarlett felt a surge of hope. She shifted her position, inching closer to the metal chair bolted to the floor. Using her bound wrists, she maneuvered the sharp edge of the chair's leg against the restraints, sawing at them with all her strength. Meanwhile, Logan and Carter moved swiftly through the hallway, dispatching Edward's men with practiced efficiency. Logan's focus was unrelenting, his every move fueled by a singular goal: getting to Scarlett. As they reached the room, Logan motioned for Carter to cover him. He kicked the door open, his flashlight slicing through the dim interior. The man standing over Scarlett turned, raising his weapon. But Logan didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot, the sound deafening in the confined space. The man dropped, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Scarlett!" Logan rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he freed her from the last of the restraints. "Are you okay?" Scarlett looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "I am now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. Logan helped her to her feet, his grip firm and reassuring. "Let's get out of here." They moved quickly, navigating the chaotic scene as Carter and his team secured the warehouse. Scarlett leaned against Logan, her legs weak but her spirit unbroken. As they reached the car, Logan turned to her, his voice low and urgent. "Did they hurt you?" "No," Scarlett said, shaking her head. "But Logan, Edward isn't going to stop. He'll come after us again." Logan's expression hardened. "Not if I stop him first." Scarlett grabbed his arm, her eyes searching his. "You can't let him control you. If we're going to fight him, we do it the right way, with the truth, not revenge." Logan hesitated, then nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I'm letting him get away with this." Scarlett squeezed his hand. "Neither am I." As the car sped away from the warehouse, Scarlett glanced out the window, the city lights blurring past. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, her fear replaced by resolve. Edward might have tried to silence them, but he had underestimated their strength and their determination to uncover the truth. Logan's voice broke the silence. "We'll finish this, Scarlett. For my mother, for yours." Scarlett turned to him, her gaze steady. "For us." The sun was beginning to rise over the city as Logan and Scarlett returned to the Matthews mansion. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but their resolve remained unshaken. They had survived Edward's latest attack, and now it was time to finish what they had started. In the library, Logan spread out the evidence they had gathered. Bank records, letters, Miriam's testimony, and now the account of Scarlett's kidnapping. Each piece painted a damning picture of Edward's involvement in Cynthia's disappearance, and his ruthless efforts to bury the truth. "We have everything we need," Logan said, his voice firm but laced with weariness. "If we take this to the authorities, Edward won't be able to talk his way out of it." Scarlett leaned over the table, her fingers tracing the edges of a photograph of Cynthia. "And what happens then? He's powerful." "Logan, he'll try to manipulate the system." Logan met her gaze, his eyes blazing with determination. "Not this time. I've already spoken to my lawyer and a few trusted reporters. If Edward tries to pull any strings, we'll make sure the public knows exactly who he is and what he's done." Scarlett nodded, though the thought of facing Edward again sent a shiver down her spine. "Let's end this." Later that day, Logan made the call. He arranged a meeting with Edward at a private club, the same place where he had confronted him before. This time, however, Logan wasn't going alone. Scarlett insisted on coming. And though Logan was reluctant, he eventually agreed. When they arrived, the club's opulent decor and hushed atmosphere felt at odds with the tension thrumming between them. Edward was already waiting in a private room, seated at a polished mahogany table with a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked up as they entered, his expression calm but watchful. "Logan," Edward said smoothly, his gaze flicking to Scarlett. "And the young lady. How bold of you both to show up after recent events." Logan didn't waste time on pleasantries. He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Edward. "You know what this is," he said, his voice cold. "And you know what happens if this goes public." Edward opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "This is quite the collection," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you forget. Logan, I've spent decades cleaning up this family's messes. Do you really think a few pieces of paper will bring me down?" Scarlett stepped forward, her voice steady and sharp. "It's not just paper, Edward. It's witnesses, testimonies, evidence of every crime you've tried to cover up. This isn't going away." Edward's smirk faltered, and his gaze darkened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I built this family's legacy from the ground up. You think you can tear it down with a few threats?" Logan's jaw tightened. "It's already crumbling, Edward. You've spent your life controlling people, silencing them. But this time, you've underestimated us." Edward's eyes narrowed, his composure slipping. "And what do you want, Logan? Money, power, a piece of the empire you've always resented." "I want justice," Logan said sharply. "For my mother, for Scarlett, for everyone you've hurt." Edward's hand tightened around his glass. And for a moment, Scarlett thought he might lash out, but instead, he set the glass down with a deliberate calm and leaned forward. "Justice is a nice word," he said, "but it's an illusion. You think the world will care about some old family scandal? They'll forget in a week." "Maybe," Logan admitted, "but you won't, because you'll be in prison, watching everything you've built fall apart." Edward's smirk returned, but it was strained. "You're playing a dangerous game, Logan. Be careful it doesn't backfire." "It won't," Logan replied, his voice like steel, "because we're not afraid of you anymore," as they left the club. Scarlett felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The confrontation had been intense, but she knew it wasn't over. Edward was cornered, and a man like him wouldn't go down without a fight. In the car, Logan's phone buzzed. He answered quickly, his expression shifting as he listened. "Understood," he said before hanging up. "What is it?" Scarlett asked, her heart racing. "The authorities are on their way to Edward's estate," Logan said. "They're executing a warrant based on the evidence we gave them." Scarlett nodded, her chest tightening. "It's happening." That evening, news broke of Edward Matthews's arrest. The media swarmed the story, uncovering decades of corruption and abuse tied to the Matthews family empire. Logan watched the coverage in silence, his face a mask of stoic resolve. Scarlett sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. "It's over," she said softly. Logan shook his head. "Not yet. There's still so much damage to undo. But this is a start," Scarlett said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "And your mother, my mother, she would be proud." Logan looked at her, his eyes softening. "You're right," he said. "This is just the beginning." As the weight of the day began to lift, Scarlett felt a glimmer of hope. They had taken on Edward Matthews and won. But more importantly, they had honored the legacy of the woman who had brought them together. For the first time in years, the future felt bright. The following days passed in a whirlwind of news coverage and legal proceedings. Edward Matthews's arrest sent shockwaves through the community, and the media uncovered layer after layer of his corruption. The Matthews name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now tarnished beyond repair. Logan handled the fallout with quiet determination. He worked closely with investigators, providing them with every piece of evidence they needed to ensure Edward faced justice. Scarlett stayed by his side, offering support and helping him navigate the storm. One afternoon, as the dust began to settle, Logan and Scarlett stood in the library. The once oppressive room now felt lighter, as if the house itself was breathing easier without Edward's shadow looming over it. "This place feels different," Scarlett said. Running her fingers along the edge of the desk, Logan nodded, his gaze distant. "It is different. For the first time, it feels like it's mine, not his." Scarlett smiled. "And what are you going to do with it?" Logan turned to her, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I was thinking about selling it." Scarlett's eyes widened. "Selling it?" "Yes," Logan said firmly. "This house represents everything I want to leave behind. The lies, the manipulation. It's all tied to this place. I want a fresh start." Scarlett studied him, her heart swelling with admiration. "That sounds freeing." Logan stepped closer, his voice softening. "What about you? What does a fresh start look like for you?" Scarlett hesitated, her thoughts swirling. For so long, she had been consumed by questions about her past. Now, with Edward's downfall and her mother's story brought to light, the possibilities felt endless. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I think it starts with letting go of the fear. For the first time, I feel like I can just be me." Logan reached out, taking her hand in his. "You've been braver than anyone I've ever known, Scarlett. You've faced things most people wouldn't dare to. If anyone deserves a fresh start, it's you." Scarlett felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for believing in me." "I think it's the other way around," Logan said, his voice warm. "You gave me the strength to face my family's demons. You reminded me what it means to fight for something real." A week later, Logan hosted a small gathering at the mansion. It wasn't a party. It was a quiet moment to honor the lives that had been overshadowed by the Matthews family's dark legacy. Miriam Collins attended, her sharp eyes filled with pride as she saw Logan and Scarlett's resilience. During the gathering, Scarlett found herself drawn to the photograph of Cynthia that now hung in the library. Logan had placed it there to honor his mother, a symbol of her strength and sacrifice. "She'd be proud of you," Logan said, stepping up beside her. Scarlett nodded, her voice steady. "And of you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling over them. Finally, Logan broke the quiet. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Scarlett turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Logan hesitated, then met her gaze with a rare vulnerability. "I don't want you to leave." Scarlett's breath caught. "Logan, I know you have your own dreams, your own life," he continued, his voice sincere. "But after everything we've been through, I can't imagine facing the future without you in it." Scarlett's chest tightened, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She thought about her journey, about the man who had once seemed so distant and cold, but had become her closest ally, and something more. "Logan, I don't want to leave either," she said softly. "Not if it means leaving you." A smile spread across Logan's face, the first true smile Scarlett had seen from him. "Then stay. We can figure out the rest together." Scarlett nodded, her heart swelling with hope. Together, over the next few months, Logan sold the mansion and began rebuilding his life. He donated much of the proceeds to charities dedicated to helping families torn apart by abuse and corruption. A small way to atone for the Matthews family's sins, Scarlett started a community program in Cynthia's name, offering support to women in difficult circumstances. Their lives were no longer dictated by the shadows of the past. They had faced the darkness together, and now they were free to create a future filled with light, love, and purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Scarlett and Logan stood hand in hand, watching the sky burn with shades of orange and gold. The weight of their journey had not disappeared, but it no longer felt unbearable. "This is what she wanted," Scarlett said, her voice quiet but sure. "A life where we could be free." Logan squeezed her hand, his gaze soft. "And we'll honor her memory by living it." As the first stars appeared in the sky, they turned to face the future, together, unburdened and unafraid.